The screen opens with a close-up shot of weathered hands, counting out 6 crumpled $100 bills, the sound of paper rustling filling the silence. The camera pulls back to reveal a faded red 1995 Mustang with dents along the passenger side and a crack across the windshield. I thought buying this beat-up Mustang for $600 was the worst financial decision of my life. I was wrong. It was actually the most important purchase I'd ever make. But I wouldn't realize that until 6 months later when an elderly woman knocked on my apartment door at 11 p.m., clutching a manila envelope with trembling hands and tears streaming down her face. The scene shifts to show the same Mustang parked outside a modest Phoenix apartment complex, its paint dulled by the Arizona sun. A young woman with shoulder-length brown hair emerges from the driver's seat, wrestling with a grocery bag while calling out to a small girl with pigtails who's already running toward the apartment stairs. My name is Delaney Mitchell, and this is the story of how a desperate car purchase turned into something I never could have imagined. 6 months ago, I was a 28-year-old single mom trying to keep my graphic design business afloat while raising my 8-year-old daughter, Willa. My divorce had been finalized for exactly 4 months, and I was learning the hard way that starting over isn't just emotionally exhausting, it's financially devastating. The camera follows Delaney as she unlocks her apartment door, juggling keys, groceries, and her laptop bag. The interior reveals a small but tidy space with Willa's artwork taped to the refrigerator and a makeshift office set up on the dining room table, complete with a second-hand computer and stacks of design proofs. I'd always been the type of person who researched every purchase, read every review, planned every financial decision down to the last dollar. But when your only reliable car dies on the same day your biggest client cancels their contract, and you've got exactly $600 in your emergency fund, desperation has a way of overriding common sense. Willa appears in the doorway, still in her school clothes, holding a math worksheet. "Mom, I need help with my homework, and Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you can pick me up from soccer practice tomorrow since you missed today." Delaney's face shows the strain of being pulled in multiple directions. She kneels down to Willa's level, smoothing her daughter's hair with one hand, while her other hand unconsciously fidgets with her car keys. That's when I found Cordelia's Craigslist ad. 1995. Ford Mustang, runs good, $600 firm, cash only. No lengthy description, no detailed photos. Just an address in an older part of Phoenix and a phone number. When I called, an elderly woman answered with a shaky voice and said she needed to sell the car quickly because she was moving to assisted living. The scene transitions to a flashback of Delaney standing in a driveway, looking skeptically at the Mustang, while an elderly woman with silver hair watches from the porch. The woman appears nervous, glancing frequently at the street as if expecting someone. Cordelia Brennan seemed like any other grandmother trying to simplify her life. She was probably in her 70s, wearing a faded floral dress and holding the car title with hands that shook just slightly. The car had belonged to her granddaughter, she said, but she didn't elaborate. Something in her eyes suggested there was more to the story, but I was too focused on whether the engine would start to ask the right questions. Back in the present, Delaney helps Willa with her math while glancing at her phone, calculating how many hours she'd need to work to cover the month's expenses. The weight of single parenthood is evident in every gesture, every worried glance at unpaid bills stacked on the counter. I handed over those $600 thinking I was just solving a transportation problem. I had no idea I was about to become part of something much bigger than a simple used car transaction. I couldn't have imagined that this rusty Mustang would lead me into a world of family secrets, corporate corruption, and a choice that would test everything I thought I knew about doing what's right versus protecting what matters most. The camera slowly zooms in on Delaney's face as she looks out the window at the Mustang, the evening light casting long shadows across the parking lot. But that revelation was still 6 months away. First, I had to learn to live with my decision. And trust me, there were plenty of moments when I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. 3 weeks earlier, I was sitting in my divorce attorney's office, staring at a bill for $3,200 that I didn't have. Margaret Hollis had been worth every penny during the custody battle, but paying her had drained what little savings I'd managed to scrape together from my freelance graphic design work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was designing wedding invitations and baby shower announcements while my own marriage crumbled and my bank account hit rock bottom. The good news is you got primary custody of Willa, and he has to pay child support, Margaret said, sliding the final papers across her mahogany desk. The bad news is enforcing that support is going to be another uphill battle if Garrett decides to play games. I walked out of that office knowing I was officially a single mother, with a court order that felt more like expensive paper than actual protection. My Honda Civic, the one reliable thing left in my life, chose that exact moment to die in Margaret's parking lot. The engine made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a wheeze and a death rattle, then simply gave up. Camden arrived, 20 minutes later with jumper cables that proved useless. My older brother had always been my voice of reason, the one who talked me out of impulsive decisions and reminded me to think things through. He took one look under the hood and shook his head. "Delaney, this engine is done. You're looking at least $2,000 to replace it, probably more." He wiped his hands on an old rag, his expression sympathetic but realistic. "With what you've been through this year, maybe it's time to consider something more practical," but practical required money I didn't have. That night, I sat at my dining room table with my laptop open to Craigslist, scrolling through used cars while Willa worked on her spelling homework beside me. Every decent vehicle was thousands of dollars beyond my reach. My emergency fund, which used to be a source of pride, had been reduced to exactly $840 after paying Margaret's final bill. "Mom, how do you spell adventure?" Willa asked, pencil poised over her worksheet. "Adventure," I replied automatically, but the word stuck with me. Adventure. What I needed wasn't an adventure. It was a miracle on 4 wheels. That's when Cordelia's ad appeared at the top of my search results. The posting was bare bones, compared to the detailed descriptions other sellers provided. No mention of maintenance records, no list of recent repairs, just basic information and a price that made my heart jump. $600. I called the number immediately. A woman's voice answered on the second ring, soft and slightly tremulous. "Hello? Hi, I'm calling about the Mustang you have listed on Craigslist." There was a pause, then, "Oh yes, the red one. Are you interested in seeing it? Something in—" Her tone seemed rushed, almost nervous. "Yes, I'd love to take a look. Is tomorrow afternoon good? Actually, could you come today? I'm hoping to have this settled quickly." Within an hour, I was standing in the driveway of a small ranch house in an older Phoenix neighborhood, looking at what would either be my salvation or my biggest mistake. The Mustang sat in the shade of a large mesquite tree, its red paint faded to an almost pink hue in places. The front bumper had a dent, the leather seats were cracked and patched with duct tape, and when Cordelia started the engine there was definitely a rattle coming from somewhere under the hood. "She runs well," Cordelia said, though her hands shook as she held the keys. "My granddaughter took good care of her before she passed." I wanted to ask more about her granddaughter, but something in Cordelia's demeanor suggested the topic was off limits. She kept glancing toward the street as if expecting someone, and when I asked about maintenance records, she simply said they'd been lost. "I need to sell her today," Cordelia added, her voice firmer now. "Cash only. I'm moving to a care facility next week and I can't take her with me." I test drove the Mustang around the block. The transmission shifted smoothly, the brakes worked fine, and despite the mysterious rattle, the engine seemed strong. When I returned to the driveway, Cordelia was waiting with the title already filled out. $600, right? I asked, pulling the cash from my purse. "That's right, dear." She took the money with those trembling hands and signed the title with quick, nervous strokes. "I hope she serves you well." As I drove away in my new-to-me Mustang, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of control over my circumstances. The car wasn't perfect, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, and it represented the first step toward rebuilding the life Willa and I deserved. I had no idea that Cordelia's nervousness hadn't been about selling the car. It had been about what she was hiding inside it. The first strange thing I noticed happened about 2 weeks after buying the Mustang. I was rushing to get Willa to school when I realized the glove compartment wouldn't open properly. The handle moved, but something seemed to be blocking it from the inside. When I finally forced it open, there was barely enough space for my registration and insurance cards. It felt like there should have been more room, but I was already running late and didn't think much of it. Then there were the small modifications I started noticing. The radio had been rewired in a way that seemed deliberate, but served no obvious purpose. There was a tiny hole drilled in the dashboard that didn't match any standard aftermarket installation I'd ever seen. Most puzzling was a small switch hidden under the driver's seat that didn't seem to connect to anything. When I asked Rico, my mechanic, about it during the first oil change, he scratched his head. Honestly, Delaney, I've never seen modifications like these. It's like someone was trying to hide something or create secret compartments, but I can't figure out what they were going for. The paranoia started small. I'd park the Mustang outside my apartment and swear it was facing a different direction when I came back. One morning, I found the driver's seat adjusted differently than I remembered leaving it. When I mentioned it to Camden during our weekly coffee meetup, he gave me that concerned brother look. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you're just not remembering things clearly. But Willa saw her too. We were walking to the car after grocery shopping when my daughter tugged on my sleeve. Mom, why is that old lady walking around our car again? I looked up to see an elderly woman with silver hair circling the Mustang slowly, peering into the windows. When she noticed me watching, she quickly walked away toward a blue sedan parked across the lot. By the time I got the groceries loaded and looked again, she was gone. Willa, what do you mean, again? I've seen her before. Yesterday, when you were inside getting the mail, she was looking at our car. She had her hands on the windows like she was trying to see inside. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I started parking in different spots around the complex, taking note of which cars belonged to neighbors and which ones seemed out of place. The blue sedan appeared 3 more times over the next week, always with the same elderly woman behind the wheel. My financial situation wasn't improving either. Garrett had stopped making child support payments, claiming his construction business was struggling. When I called him, he was defensive and dismissive. Look, Delaney, I'm doing the best I can here. The economy's tough and I've got my own bills to pay. Your own bills? Willa is your daughter too, Garrett. The court order isn't a suggestion. Yeah, well, court orders don't create money out of thin air. You'll get it when I have it. Without that monthly support, I was taking on any design project I could find, working until 2 a.m. most nights just to keep up with rent and utilities. The Mustang needed repairs I couldn't afford. The mysterious rattle was getting worse, and now there was a grinding sound when I turned left. Rico delivered the devastating news on a Thursday morning that started with Willa complaining about stomach pains and ended with me sitting in his waiting room fighting back tears. The transmission is shot, Delaney. It's going to cost at least $1,200 to rebuild it, maybe more. And there's something else weird. I ran the VIN through my database, and it shows this car might have been involved in some kind of legal case a few years back. I can't access the details, but there are flags in the system. $1,200 might as well have been $12,000. I had maybe $300 in my checking account, and that was earmarked for groceries and Willa's school supplies. What kind of legal case? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Could be anything. Insurance fraud, evidence in a crime, civil, litigation. Without proper access to the records, I can't tell you more. That night, I tried calling the number Cordelia had given me, but a recorded message told me it had been disconnected. I searched online for her name and address, but found nothing. It was like she'd vanished completely. The blue sedan appeared again the next morning, parked across from the school where I dropped off Willa. This time I was ready. I circled back after leaving the school zone and parked where I could watch. The elderly woman sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes, occasionally looking toward the building where I worked, before driving away. Someone was definitely watching us, and I was starting to suspect it had everything to do with that $600 Mustang and the woman who'd been so eager to sell it. I'd always been the type to accept things at face value, to trust that people were generally honest and situations were usually what they appeared to be. But lying in bed at 3 a.m. listening to every creak in the apartment building while wondering if someone was watching our windows, I realized that trusting nature might have been naive. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of taking Willa to school and heading straight to work, I drove to the Phoenix Public Library and claimed a computer in the back corner where I could see anyone approaching. If Cordelia Brennan had secrets, I was going to find them. The first search results were disappointing. There were several Cordelia Brennans in Arizona, but none matched the woman I'd met. I tried different variations, added Phoenix to the search terms, cross-referenced property records and voter registrations. Nothing concrete emerged until I remembered she'd mentioned her granddaughter. Cordelia Brennan, granddaughter Phoenix obituary, brought up a result that made my stomach drop. Iris Cordelia Brennan, age 29, died in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 17, 3 miles south of Camp Verde. She is survived by her grandmother, Cordelia Brennan of Phoenix. The obituary was dated 5 years ago, but something didn't add up. I clicked through to the accident report, which was partially available through the Department of Public Safety database. Iris had died when her white Toyota Camry veered off the highway during a rainstorm, not the red Mustang. So why had Cordelia told me the car belonged to her granddaughter? I spent the next 2 hours digging deeper into Iris Brennan's life, using my graphic design skills to navigate databases and social media archives that most people wouldn't think to check. What I found painted a picture of a woman who'd been anything but ordinary. Iris had worked as a safety inspector for the city of Phoenix, specializing in construction and building compliance. Her LinkedIn profile, which was still active, showed she'd been involved in several high-profile cases involving construction violations. The most recent posts, from just weeks before her death, mentioned something called the Valerio housing investigation. Marcus Valerio. That name sent chills down my spine, even though I couldn't immediately place why it seemed familiar. A quick search revealed he was a prominent Phoenix developer who'd built several affordable housing complexes around the city. But the news articles from 5 years ago told a darker story. City inspector alleges safety violations in low-income housing projects, read one headline from the Phoenix New Times. Whistleblower claims developer used substandard materials to maximize profits. The whistleblower was Iris Brennan. According to the article, she'd uncovered evidence that Valerio Construction had been using cheaper materials than specified in city contracts, potentially putting residents at risk. She'd been scheduled to testify before a grand jury the week after she died. My hands were shaking as I printed out the articles. This wasn't just about a used car anymore. This was about a woman who died under suspicious circumstances after exposing corruption that could have endangered hundreds of families. Called Camden from the library parking lot, my voice probably betraying more panic than I intended. I need you to meet me at Rico's shop in an hour, and bring your tools. Delaney, what's going on? You sound scared. I think I bought more than just a car, Camden. I think I bought evidence. An hour later, Camden, Rico, and I stood around the Mustang in the bay of Rico's shop. I'd explained everything I'd discovered about Iris Brennan and the Valerio investigation. Rico listened with the expression of a man who'd seen enough weird situations to take anything seriously. So you think there's something hidden in this car? Camden asked, his protective instincts clearly warring with his natural skepticism. I think Iris Brennan hid evidence in this car before she died, and her grandmother has been watching me because she's afraid of what might happen if the wrong people find out. Rico ran his hands along the door panels, checking for irregularities. These modifications I noticed before, they're starting to make sense. Someone definitely hollowed out spaces that shouldn't be hollow. The question is, Camden said, do we really want to find what's hidden? Because if you're right about this Valerio guy, and if Iris really was murdered for what she knew, then finding that evidence puts you and Willa in danger. I looked at my brother, then at Rico, then at the Mustang that had already changed my life in ways I never anticipated. 3 months ago, my biggest worry was making rent. Now I was potentially sitting on evidence in a case involving corporate corruption and possible murder. I can't pretend I don't know, I said finally. If there's evidence that could help families living in unsafe housing, or that could bring justice for Iris, then I have to find it. She died trying to do the right thing. The least I can do is finish what she started. Rico nodded slowly and reached for his panel removal tools. Then let's see what she left behind. Rico was halfway through removing the passenger door panel when we heard footsteps outside the shop. It was 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the parking lot should have been empty except for our cars. Through the grimy windows, I could see someone approaching the bay door. Rico, are you in there? The voice was elderly, female, and achingly familiar. Cordelia Brennan stood in the doorway, clutching a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile, with deep lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Behind her, parked at an angle that blocked the shop entrance, was the blue sedan I'd seen watching us. "Mrs. Brennan," I said, stepping forward. "We need to talk." "No, dear, we really don't." Her voice shook, but there was steel underneath. "You need to put that car back together and forget everything you think you've discovered." Camden moved protectively, closer to me. "Ma'am, we're not looking for trouble, but my sister has a right to know what she bought." Cordelia's laugh was bitter. "A right? Child, rights don't mean much when you're dealing with people who have money and power and absolutely no conscience." Rico set down his tools. "Mrs. Brennan, is there something hidden in this car?" For a long moment, the only sound was the evening traffic outside. Then Cordelia's shoulders sagged, and she seemed to age another 10 years right in front of us. "I never meant for you to get caught up in this, Delaney. When I saw you that day, a young mother just trying to get by, I thought maybe I could finally let go of this burden. I thought I could sell the car to someone innocent and just walk away from what Iris left behind." She walked to the Mustang and placed her hand on the hood like she was greeting an old friend. "But then I started watching you, seeing how hard you work, how much you love your little girl, and I realized I couldn't let you stumble into this blindly. You remind me so much of Iris. She would have liked you." "What did Iris leave behind?" I asked gently. Cordelia opened the manila envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a small key. "This opens a safety deposit box, but what's in the car is more important." Iris was smart, smarter than I ever gave her credit for. She knew she was in danger. Rico resumed removing the door panel, and within minutes he'd exposed a hollow space that definitely hadn't been factory standard. Inside was a waterproof bag containing a USB drive and several folded documents. "Financial records," Cordelia explained as I examined the papers. "Bank transfers, invoices for materials that were never delivered, inspection reports that were falsified. Iris spent months documenting everything Valerio Construction was doing to those housing projects. The USB drive contained even more damaging evidence. Audio recordings of conversations between Marcus Valerio and city officials, photographs of substandard concrete and wiring, correspondence proving they knew families were living in dangerous conditions, but chose profits over safety." "She recorded phone calls?" Camden asked, his voice hushed. Iris was thorough. She knew accusations without proof would be dismissed, so she gathered everything she could. The night before she was supposed to testify, she hid all of this in the car and gave me the key to the safety deposit box where she'd stored backup copies. "And then she died," I said. Cordelia nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Single car accident in perfect weather. The police said she fell asleep at the wheel, but Iris hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. She was too afraid to sleep deeply." "Why didn't you take this to the authorities after she died?" "Because they threatened me too. 2 days after the funeral, Marcus Valerio himself came to my house. Very polite, very sympathetic about my loss. Said it would be such a shame if anything happened to me before I got settled into assisted living." Rico held up the USB drive. "This could destroy him. This could get us all killed," Cordelia replied. "But I'm 83 years old and I'm tired of being afraid. More importantly, there are families living in those buildings right now and they deserve to know the truth." She reached into the envelope again and pulled out a cashier's check. When she handed it to me, I saw it was made out for $50,000. Iris had been saving money to take care of me if the case went badly. She never got the chance to use it, but she'd want you to have it now. Consider it payment for finishing what she started. I stared at the check, then at the evidence, then at Cordelia's expectant face. "You're asking me to take on Marcus Valerio and whoever else was involved in this cover-up. I'm asking you to help me honor my granddaughter's memory and protect the families she died trying to save." The choice was mine, and I knew it would change everything. I looked at that check for exactly 30 seconds before making my decision. $50,000 could solve every financial problem Willa and I faced, but taking it meant accepting that some battles are too big for ordinary people to fight. I thought about Iris Brennan, who'd been just 4 years older than me when she chose to risk everything for strangers she'd never meet. "I'll do it," I told Cordelia. "But we do this right. We contact the FBI, not local police, and we make sure this evidence gets to journalists too." Camden grabbed my arm. "Delaney, think about what you're saying. You have a daughter to protect. I am protecting her. I'm protecting her from growing up in a world where people like Marcus Valerio can put families in danger and face no consequences." 3 days later, I walked into the Phoenix FBI field office with Rico, Camden, and Cordelia beside me. Special Agent Patricia Valdez spent 4 hours reviewing the evidence Iris had collected. When she finished, her first words were, "This is enough to bring down half the city planning department." The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. The USB drive contained recordings of conversations between Marcus Valerio and 3 city officials, clearly showing bribes being offered in exchange for overlooking safety violations. The financial records proved that Valerio Construction had been billing the city for high-grade materials while using substandard alternatives, pocketing the difference. Within 6 months, Marcus Valerio was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, bribery, and racketeering. 2 city officials pled guilty and received lesser sentences in exchange for testimony. The third official, planning director Robert Hayes, chose to fight the charges and was ultimately sentenced to 8 years. But the real victory came when the court ordered full inspections of all Valerio-built housing. 17 buildings were found to have structural issues serious enough to require immediate evacuation and repairs. The families living there received temporary housing assistance and ultimately moved into safer homes built to proper standards. I used Iris's $50,000 exactly the way I think she would have wanted. $20,000 went towards starting a nonprofit organization called the Iris Brennan Foundation, which helps families in substandard housing connect with legal resources and housing advocates. Another $20,000 allowed me to expand my graphic design business into a full-service agency specializing in social justice campaigns and nonprofit work. The remaining $10,000 went into Willa's college fund, because I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing that sometimes doing the right thing comes with unexpected rewards, but you never do it for the rewards. Cordelia never made it to assisted living. Instead, she moved into a small apartment 3 blocks from us and became the grandmother Willa had never had. They spend Saturday afternoons working in Cordelia's garden while she tells stories about Iris and teaches Willa that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. The Mustang still runs, though Rico had to replace that transmission after all. I kept the car because it reminds me daily that ordinary purchases can lead to extraordinary purposes, and that sometimes the universe presents us with opportunities disguised as problems. 6 months after the FBI raid on Valerio Construction, I received a letter from Maria Santos, a single mother who had been living with her 2 children in one of the condemned buildings. She wrote, "I don't know who you are, but my family is safe now because someone cared enough to speak up. My kids have a real home for the first time in their lives." That letter sits framed on my desk as a reminder that the most important victories aren't always the ones that make headlines. I learned that buying a $600 Mustang wasn't just about solving a transportation problem. It taught me that integrity isn't measured by grand gestures, but by the small choice to do what's right when no one is watching. Sometimes those small choices ripple outward in ways we never expect, touching lives we'll never know about. Willa is 10 now, and when she asks me about courage, I tell her about her honorary grandmother Iris, who died fighting for families she'd never met, and about how a broken-down car taught us that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things. Your support helps us share these important messages about courage, integrity, and the power of standing up for what's right. The next time life puts an unexpected opportunity in your path, remember that it might just be the universe asking if you're ready to make a difference.